The Battle of Plataea in 479 BC stands as one of the most decisive and significant moments in ancient history, a clash where the courage, resilience, and determination of a coalition of Greek city-states confronted the overwhelming might of the Persian Empire. It was a turning point not just in the Greco-Persian Wars, but in the course of Western civilization itself, a confrontation that could have ended with Greece subsumed into the vast empire of Xerxes and its distinct political and cultural identity erased. Instead, the Greeks defied the odds, defeating a force far larger than their own, and in doing so secured the survival of ideas like democracy, free thought, and independent city-states which would go on to shape the Western world. To understand the battle fully, one must go back to the roots of the conflict, examine the buildup of the massive Persian invasion, and then relive the drama of the fighting at Plataea, where 40,000 Greek soldiers broke the back of a Persian army numbering as many as 300,000. The Greco-Persian Wars were a series of conflicts that grew from Persian expansionism and Greek resistance. Persia, under Darius and later Xerxes, had forged the largest empire the world had seen, stretching from India to Asia Minor and encompassing countless peoples. To them, the small, fractious Greek city-states were insignificant, a minor frontier annoyance that resisted incorporation. Yet the Greeks were fiercely independent, each polis jealously guarding its sovereignty and way of life. When the Persians demanded submission, many Greek cities submitted, but others, most famously Athens and Sparta, refused. The Athenians had already humiliated Darius at Marathon in 490 BC, a stunning victory that convinced the Persians that subduing Greece was not just necessary, but vital for their prestige and stability. Xerxes, Darius's son, prepared an invasion on a scale never before attempted, bringing hundreds of thousands of troops and a massive fleet to crush Greek resistance once and for all. The early stages of Xerxes' invasion are famous. The Spartans, under Leonidas, made their heroic stand at Thermopylae in 480 BC, where 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies held the narrow pass against the vast Persian army. Though ultimately defeated, they bought crucial time and inspired Greek morale. The Athenians, under Themistocles, turned to the sea, luring the Persian fleet into the Straits of Salamis, where the smaller, more maneuverable Greek ships annihilated the Persians in a decisive naval battle. Xerxes, shaken by the loss, retreated back to Asia with much of his army, but he left behind a formidable force under the command of Mardonius to finish the conquest of Greece. This brings us to Plataea. After Salamis, the Persians were still a grave threat. Mardonius believed that with diplomacy, bribery, and force he could bring the Greeks to heel. He attempted to win over Athens by offering them favorable terms if they abandoned the coalition, knowing the rivalry between Athens and Sparta was deep. The Athenians refused, choosing principle over self-preservation. Angered, Mardonius burned Athens for a second time, and this act steeled the Greeks to resist with even greater determination. The Spartans, often reluctant to march too far from home, finally recognized the existential threat Persia posed and agreed to send a massive force to join Athens and their allies. Thus, a great Panhellenic army was formed, comprising some 40,000 heavily armed hoplites supported by tens of thousands of lighter troops, united in the cause of freedom against tyranny. The Persians, on the other hand, still had enormous numbers. Ancient sources like Herodotus suggest figures of 300,000 or more, though modern historians debate the accuracy of these numbers. Even if exaggerated, there is no doubt the Persians vastly outnumbered the Greeks. Their army included elite units such as the Immortals, contingents from across the empire, Medes, Bactrians, Egyptians, and others, reflecting the diversity of Persia's vast dominion. Mardonius was confident, believing his cavalry and superior numbers would eventually grind down the Greeks. The two armies finally met on the plains near Plataea in Boeotia. The terrain was critical, as the Greeks sought ground that would neutralize Persian cavalry while allowing their phalanxes to hold firm. For days, There was a tense standoff, with skirmishes and cavalry raids testing the lines. The Persians tried to disrupt Greek supply lines and harass their positions, while the Greeks remained cautious, unwilling to charge rashly into disadvantageous ground. It was a test of patience as much as of arms, and the Greeks knew their best chance lay in discipline and holding their formation against Persian assaults. Eventually, the battle was forced when the Persians launched an aggressive attack to break the Greek lines. The Spartans, with their disciplined hoplites, bore the brunt of Mardonius' onslaught. The Persians relied heavily on archery, hopping to weaken the Greeks with volleys of arrows, but the bronze armor and large shields of the hoplites absorbed much of the punishment. When the fighting closed, the Persian infantry, lightly armored and less effective in hand-to-hand combat, could not withstand the sheer power of the hoplite phalanx. The Spartans and their allies pushed relentlessly forward, their long spears cutting through the enemy ranks. Amid the chaos, Mardonius himself was killed, a blow that shattered Persian morale. Meanwhile, the Athenians on another part of the battlefield clashed with the Persians' Greek allies, particularly the Thebans who had sided with Persia. It was a bitter struggle, Greek against Greek, but the Athenians prevailed. As the news of Mardonius' death spread, panic swept through the Persian ranks. Their vast army, once so imposing, broke into disarray as the Greeks pressed their advantage. The camp of the Persians was overrun, and what had begun as an overwhelming invasion turned into a disastrous rout. The victory at Plataea was total. The Persian army in Greece was annihilated, and the dream of subjugating the Greek mainland evaporated. It was not merely a military triumph but a civilizational one. Had the Persians succeeded, the unique political and cultural experiments of Greece, democracy in Athens, the austere militarism of Sparta, the flowering of philosophy, art, and science, might have been stifled or reshaped under imperial rule. Instead, by preserving their independence, the Greeks laid the groundwork for the classical age, a period that would profoundly influence Rome and, through Rome, the entire Western tradition. In the aftermath, the Greeks did not rest. They pressed their advantage, pursuing the remnants of the Persian fleet and defeating them at Mycale on the coast of Asia Minor, another decisive blow that ended Persia's naval power in the Aegean. These twin victories at Plataea and Mycale ensured that Persia would never again mount a serious attempt to conquer mainland Greece. While Persia remained a powerful empire, its aura of invincibility was shattered. The legacy of Plataea extends beyond the immediate military outcome. It was a demonstration of unity among Greek city-states that were often at each other's throats. For once, Athenians, Spartans, Corinthians, and others set aside their rivalries to defend a shared cause. This unity was fleeting, as later decades would see the Peloponnesian War tear Greece apart, but for that moment it showed what could be achieved when Greece stood together. The memory of Plataea became a symbol of resistance against tyranny, a reminder that free peoples, even when outnumbered, could prevail through discipline, courage, and determination. The numbers themselves tell a story of their own. 40,000 Greeks, heavily armed but relatively few, standing against a horde of 300,000, speaks to the drama and improbability of the outcome. Whether or not those figures are exact, the essence remains. The Greeks were the underdogs, yet they triumphed. Their victory has echoed through the centuries as an example of the few defeating the many, of quality overcoming quantity, of freedom resisting despotism. The Battle of Plataea has often been overshadowed in popular imagination by the more romantic tales of Thermopylae and Salamis. The last stand of Leonidas and the cunning naval strategy of Themistocles are easier to dramatize. But Plataea was, in many ways, the crowning achievement of the war, the battle that truly ended Persia's ambitions in Greece. Without it, Salamis might have been only a temporary reprieve. With it, the Greeks secured their future. The significance of Plataea extends into philosophy and culture. One can speculate that without the Greek victory, the flourishing of Athens in the 5th century BC might never have occurred. The golden age of Pericles, the works of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the art and architecture that still inspires today. All of this was enabled by the survival of a free Greece. Persia was a sophisticated empire in its own right, but its centralized autocracy was fundamentally different from the Greek experiment in citizenship and debate. By halting Persia's advance, Plataea preserved a different trajectory for human development, one that emphasized individual freedom and civic responsibility. Even centuries later, when Alexander the Great led Macedon to conquer Persia, the memory of the Persian invasions lingered. Alexander presented himself as avenger of Greece, striking back at the empire that had once sought to enslave it. His campaigns carried Greek culture deep into Asia, spreading the Hellenistic world and blending it with the East. But none of that would have been possible had Plataea ended differently. The story of Plataea also highlights the role of leadership and morale in warfare. Mardonius was brave and skilled, but he underestimated the resolve of the Greeks and over-relied on the size of his force. The Greeks, by contrast, were inspired not by conquest but by defense of their homes and way of life. That difference in motivation cannot be measured in numbers, but it is often decisive. At Plataea, it proved to be the factor that tipped the scales. The battlefields of ancient Greece are silent now, but the lessons endure. Plataea reminds us that history often turns on moments of desperate courage and unity against overwhelming odds. It was not inevitable that Greece would survive. Many empires have swallowed smaller states whole, extinguishing their independence forever. But the Greeks refused to yield, and in their stand at Plataea they ensured that their unique voice would not be silenced. In the end, the Battle of Plataea was not just a Greek victory over Persia. It was a triumph of resilience over domination, of freedom over subjugation, of the few over the many. It marked the survival of Greece, and with it the survival of ideas that would go on to shape the modern world. From the ruins of that battlefield arose the assurance that the West, as it would come to be known, had been saved. The legacy of Plataea is written not only in the annals of military history, but in the very foundations of Western civilization. Background of the Greco-Persian Wars. The origins of the Battle of Plataea can be traced back to the earlier clashes between Persia and the Greek city-states. Darius the Great had already attempted to expand Persian control into mainland Greece, demanding submission from the fractious Greek polis. Athens and Sparta resisted, setting themselves apart from cities that accepted Persian overlordship. In 490 BC, Darius sent an army across the Aegean that landed at Marathon. There the Athenians and their allies won an astonishing victory, repelling the Persians. This humiliation planted the seeds for a larger invasion. Darius, son Xerxes, determined to restore Persian honor and conquer Greece, raised the largest army the ancient world had ever seen, setting the stage for a monumental conflict. The Persian invasion of Greece. In 480 BC, Xerxes launched his invasion of Greece with an army that ancient sources claim numbered hundreds of thousands. He constructed pontoon bridges across the Hellespont and carved canals through mountains to ensure supply lines. The invasion first encountered heroic resistance at Thermopylae, where Leonidas and his Spartans held the narrow pass before being overwhelmed. Athens, abandoned by its citizens, was burned by the Persians. Yet at sea, the cunning Athenian leader Themistocles lured the massive Persian fleet into the Straits of Salamis, where Greek ships inflicted devastating losses. Despite these setbacks, Xerxes left behind his general Mardonius to continue the campaign in Greece with a formidable force, while he retreated to Asia to secure his empire. Persian strategy under Mardonius. Mardonius, a skilled commander and cousin of Xerxes, believed he could still complete the conquest of Greece. His strategy was multifaceted. Militarily, he relied on his cavalry and vast numbers to pressure the Greeks into battle. Politically, he sought to exploit divisions among the city-states. He sent envoys to Athens offering favorable terms if they abandoned the Greek coalition, knowing the rivalry between Athens and Sparta was fierce. Athens, however, refused, preferring ruin over submission. Enraged, Mardonius marched south, destroying Athens once again. With his army encamped in Boeotia, he awaited the Greeks, confident that Persian wealth, resources, and sheer numbers would eventually overwhelm them. He underestimated, however, the growing determination of the Greeks to defend their freedom. Greek coalition formation. The Greek response to Mardonius was remarkable, as it showed rare unity among fiercely independent city-states. Athens, having suffered the destruction of its city, looked to Sparta for leadership on land. Sparta, which traditionally hesitated to send armies far from home, recognized the existential danger and committed to the fight. Together with Corinth, Megara, and other allies, they formed a massive coalition force. Roughly 40,000 heavily armored hoplites were assembled, supported by thousands of lighter troops and helots. These citizen soldiers were motivated not by conquest but by survival, defending their families, homes, and way of life. The alliance was fragile, with rivalries simmering beneath the surface, but the Persian threat compelled them to act together as never before. Persian army composition. The Persian army under Mardonius was vast, drawn from the many subject peoples of the empire. It included Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Indians, Egyptians, and contingents from Asia Minor. Each brought different arms and tactics: cavalry from the east, archers from Persia, and infantry levies from conquered lands. The core of the force remained the Persian elite, including the immortals, famed for their discipline and numbers. Yet despite this diversity, the Persian infantry was lightly armored compared to the Greek hoplites, and their wicker shields and shorter spears were ill-suited for close combat. Mardonius believed that overwhelming numbers and superior cavalry would compensate for these weaknesses, but in reality, the differences in equipment and fighting style would prove decisive. Geography and terrain of Plataea. The battlefield chosen was near the city of Plataea in Boeotia, a wide plain intersected by rivers and small hills. This terrain was critical. The Persians, with their superior cavalry, preferred open ground where mobility could dominate. The Greeks, by contrast, sought to minimize cavalry's impact and fight in conditions where their heavy infantry phalanxes could stand firm. The Greeks positioned themselves near the foothills of Mount Cithaeron, where supplies could reach them and cavalry was less effective. The Persians camped on the plain, confident their raids and harassment would weaken the Greek position. Control of water and supplies became a central factor, and both sides maneuvered for days without risking a full-scale battle, waiting for opportunity. Initial standoff. For over a week, the two armies faced each other across the plain in a tense stalemate. Neither side wanted to commit rashly, as both understood the stakes. Mardonius used his cavalry to harass Greek positions, cutting off supplies and attacking water sources. These raids disrupted Greek lines and killed important commanders, increasing pressure on the coalition. The Greeks, however, resisted calls to charge prematurely, knowing that advancing onto open ground would expose them to Persian cavalry and archery. This period of skirmishing tested patience and discipline. Each day, the armies stared across the plain, with morale wavering on both sides. The eventual collapse of the standoff would be triggered by strategic missteps and growing desperation for supplies. Breakdown of the standoff. Eventually, the fragile Greek position was compromised. Persian cavalry successfully disrupted supply lines, threatening the Greeks with hunger and thirst. This forced the Greek commanders to consider repositioning to more secure ground. During a night maneuver, the Greeks attempted to retreat slightly to safer terrain, but poor coordination caused their lines to fragment. At dawn, the Persians discovered what they thought was a Greek retreat. Mardonius seized the chance to strike, believing he had caught the Greeks in disarray. Confident that his cavalry could rout them, he launched a full-scale attack. In reality, though the Greeks were scattered, their units regrouped and prepared to fight. What looked like a weakness became the opening act of the decisive battle. The battle begins. The Persians advanced with speed, their archers losing volleys of arrows at the Greek lines. Their cavalry swirled around, attempting to strike flanks and disrupt formations. The Spartans bore the brunt of the initial assault, standing firm under the hail of arrows behind their large shields. The Persians pressed aggressively, hopping to crush the Greeks before they could fully consolidate. Yet the hoplite discipline held, the phalanxes locking shields and bracing spears. The sound of bronze against wicker, the cries of men, and the thunder of cavalry hooves filled the plain. What had begun as a chaotic pursuit suddenly turned into a fierce battle of endurance and will, where the superior armor of the Greeks began to show. The Spartan phalanx versus Persian infantry. As the fighting closed, the Greek phalanx revealed its strength. The Spartans and their allies pushed forward, their long spears piercing Persian shields and armor. In close combat, the Persians were disadvantaged. Their lighter equipment, shorter weapons, and lack of heavy shields left them vulnerable. The hoplites, trained to fight shoulder to shoulder, moved as one impenetrable wall of bronze. Persian arrows had little effect against their armor, and once engaged in melee, the Greeks methodically drove back their opponents. The discipline of the Spartan-led phalanx contrasted with the looser formations of the Persians. Every step forward by the Greeks tightened the vice, reducing the effectiveness of the Persians' numbers. The phalanx was proving itself the ultimate battlefield weapon. The death of Mardonius. The turning point of the battle came when Mardonius, leading from the front, was struck down. According to accounts, he was killed by a Spartan warrior with a well-aimed throw of a spear. The sight of their commander's death sent shockwaves through the Persian ranks. Leadership was central to Persian cohesion, and with Mardonius gone, chaos spread quickly. Units faltered, coordination collapsed, and morale plummeted. The Greeks, sensing the weakness, pressed harder. Panic began to replace discipline in the Persian lines. Soldiers who had once fought with confidence now sought escape. The fall of Mardonius was more than the death of a general. It symbolized the unraveling of the Persian campaign in Greece. Athenian clashes with Theban allies. On another part of the battlefield, the Athenians fought not Persians but fellow Greeks. The Thebans, long rivals of Athens, had sided with Persia, hoping to emerge dominant in Greece if the Persians won. Their clash was bitter, driven by political hatred as much as battlefield necessity. The Athenians, fueled by anger at Theban betrayal and the destruction of their city, fought ferociously. The battle between hoplites on both sides was brutal and evenly matched, but gradually the Athenians gained the upper hand. When news of the Persian collapse and Mardonius' death reached them, the Thebans retreated. Their defeat added to the overall collapse of the Persian cause, leaving Mardonius' army isolated and surrounded. Collapse of Persian lines. Once Mardonius fell, panic swept through the Persian army. Soldiers began to flee toward their fortified camp, pursued relentlessly by the Greeks. What had been an organized force dissolved into a mass of terrified men, discarding weapons and shields in their desperation to escape. The Persian cavalry, once so threatening, lost cohesion, and the archers could no longer maintain a steady barrage. The Greeks, sensing total victory, surged forward with renewed determination. The immense numerical advantage of the Persians counted for nothing, as units disintegrated and the battlefield became a scene of slaughter. The once mighty Persian army was reduced to fragments, unable to regroup or resist the relentless push of the hoplites. Overrunning of Persian camp. The fleeing Persians sought refuge in their fortified camp, hastily constructed on the plain. Believing the walls would protect them, they crowded inside. The Greeks, however, would not be denied. The Spartans, Athenians, and their allies stormed the fortifications, breaking through with ferocity. Inside, the Persians were trapped, their numbers now a liability in the confined space. The slaughter was immense. Supplies, treasure, and provisions were seized, and the camp became a graveyard for the once mighty force. Few Persians escaped. Those who did fled northward, chased by Greek cavalry and light troops. The overrunning of the camp signaled the complete destruction of Persia's land army in Greece, ensuring no chance of regrouping or co-Greek victory at Plataea. The scale of the Greek victory at Plataea was astonishing. From a position of apparent weakness, the united Greek force had annihilated the largest army Persia had ever fielded in Greece. Tens of thousands of Persians lay dead, their commander killed and their ambitions shattered. The Greeks had not merely defended their land, they had struck a devastating blow to the empire's prestige. The Spartans, Athenians, and their allies emerged triumphant, and the battlefield was littered with evidence of their courage and discipline. For Greece, this was more than just a battle won. It was the definitive proof that free citizen soldiers, fighting for their homeland, could overcome a vastly larger imperial power. Counterattack. Aftermath victory at Mycale. Even as news of Plataea spread, another blow fell upon Persia. On the very same day, according to tradition, the Greek fleet attacked and defeated the remnants of the Persian navy at Mycale on the coast of Asia Minor. This double victory ensured that Persian forces in Greece and the Aegean were completely destroyed. The Persians retreated back into their empire, never again attempting a major invasion of mainland Greece. The Greeks, emboldened, took the fight across the sea, liberating Ionian cities from Persian rule. The twin victories of Plataea and Mycale ended Xerxes' grand campaign in humiliation and transformed the Greeks from desperate defenders into confident warriors shaping the destiny of the Aegean world. Impact on Greece. The victory had profound consequences for Greece. It secured the independence of the city-states, allowing their unique cultures and political systems to flourish. Athens, having proven its resilience, soon entered its golden age under Pericles, becoming a center of democracy, philosophy, and art. Sparta retained its prestige as the greatest land power, admired for its discipline and military prowess. The coalition that had won at Plataea would not last, as rivalries eventually resurfaced, leading to the destructive Peloponnesian War. Yet, for a generation, the Greeks enjoyed a period of confidence and expansion. The memory of Plataea instilled pride and a sense of destiny, shaping the identity of Greece as the defender of freedom against tyranny. Legacy: Plataea as decisive battle. Though Thermopylae and Salamis often capture popular imagination, Plataea was the decisive battle that truly ended Persian ambitions in Greece. Without Plataea, the earlier victories might have been temporary, as Persia could regroup and try again. By destroying Mardonius' army, the Greeks removed the immediate threat and proved their superiority in land combat. The battle showed that Persian numbers and wealth could not overcome the discipline and determination of hoplites. Herodotus, writing later, celebrated Plataea as the crowning moment of the Greco-Persian Wars. It became a symbol of unity and strength, remembered not just as a military triumph, but as the event that secured the survival of Greece and its unique contributions to civilization. Symbolism: unity of Greek city-states. Plataea also became a symbol of what could be achieved when Greeks set aside their rivalries. The Spartans and Athenians, often bitter enemies, had fought side by side for survival. Corinth, Megara, and smaller states had contributed their share, demonstrating that even small polities had a role in the defense of freedom. The unity was fragile and would not endure, but the example remained powerful. Generations later, orators would invoke Plataea to remind Greeks of the strength of cooperation. It represented the idea that freedom was worth defending at any cost, and that even small states, if united, could resist the mightiest empire. Plataea thus transcended mere military history to become a moral and political lesson. Long-term significance: preservation of Western civilization. The ultimate significance of Plataea lies in what it preserved. Had Persia succeeded, Greece might have been absorbed into the empire, its independence and political experiments extinguished. Without Plataea, the flowering of Athens, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theater, and science, might never have occurred. The works of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the architecture of the Parthenon, All these depended on the survival of Greece. The Western tradition of free inquiry and civic participation traces back to this moment. By crushing the Persian army, 40,000 Greeks safeguarded the seeds of a civilization that would influence Rome, the Renaissance, and the modern world. Plataea was not only a battle, it was the saving of the West.